Jenkins. It is an honor to join you today to celebrate the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, a man who, when the poor and the dispossessed needed a champion, and a country needed healing, stepped forward again and again and again and said, "Send me." Reverend Jackson's immense gifts were apparent at an early age, even if his circumstances conspired to try to hold him back. Born out of wedlock to a teenage mom, growing up under the oppressive cloud of segregation, confined to schools, sports facilities, movie theaters that were separate and unequal. It was a world where on Thanksgiving he'd have to wait for his mother to come home on the bus carrying leftovers from the dinner she had to cook for somebody else. A world designed to tell a child that he or she could only go so far. That to think otherwise would be foolish or dangerous, and that wisdom required you to accept your lot in life. And young Jesse refused to accept that verdict. He was a born leader, an athlete, a talker, knew how to talk, star quarterback, student body president. He could have succeeded within the confines that were determined for him and had a successful life. But like so many of his generation, so many extraordinary civil rights leaders in the late 50s and 60s, that Joshua generation, he instinctively understood that individual success meant nothing unless everybody was free. So he became inspired by the bus boycotts in Montgomery. He led 7 black students into the whites-only library, sitting down and getting arrested for reading. Think about that. The library closed, but then it reopened. And when it did, it was open to everyone. "Send me," Jesse said, even as a young man, and the world got a little bit better. By the time Reverend Jackson graduated from college, he had attended Chicago Theological Seminary. He knew the nature of his calling, and he became, as everybody knows, the youngest member of SCLC, assigned to lead Operation Breadbasket here in Chicago, right around the time that Isaiah Thomas is talking about. And it was during this period, and especially after Dr. King's death, when the optimism of the early movement had begun to fade and leadership had begun to fracture, and when the country seemed to have grown bored, gotten weary of the idea of justice and equality, and moved on to other concerns, that Reverend Jackson rose above despair and kept that righteous flame alive. Through Operation Push, he led boycotts and challenged corporate policies around hiring and contracting, recognizing that civil rights without economic justice was an empty promise. He backed unions in their organizing efforts and activists in fair wage campaigns, understanding that if the have-nots and the have-little bits ever learned to make common cause across racial lines instead of fighting each other over breadcrumbs, everybody would benefit. He helped register millions of voters. He fought against biases in the criminal justice system. He drew attention to local abuses of power and called folks at the national level to account. And by the early 80s, he was delivering that message of change and hope across the globe, freeing hostages from captivity, fighting to end apartheid in South Africa. And then, in 1984, as the powers that be in Washington were rolling back hard-won progress, slashing the social safety net, when more and more folks were getting left behind, and greed was being trumpeted as a virtue. See, we've been there before. He stepped forward once again and said, "Send me." He ran for the presidency of the United States of America. I had just graduated from college during that first campaign. And I was living in New York at the time. I was working to pay off my student loans, eating a lot of tuna fish and camel soup. And if I went to a diner, I'd grab some extra crackers, put them in my pocket. And I was inspired by the civil rights movement, and I had in my mind to work for social justice, but even though I was full of good intentions, I was uncertain of how to serve, and I remember one night sitting in my janky apartment, and I got an old black and white TV with the rabbit ears, and I'm kind of jiggering around, and it's about this big. I know young people can't imagine, but the TV was about this big. And I'm watching the Democratic, and I remember how when that debate was over, I turned off that TV, and I thought the same thing that I know a lot of people thought that night, even if they didn't want to admit it, that in his ideas, in his platform, in his analysis, in his intelligence, in his insight, Jesse hadn't just held his own. He had owned that stage. He wasn't an intruder. He wasn't a pretender. He belonged on that stage. And the message he sent to a 22-year-old child of a single mother with a funny name, an outsider, was that maybe there wasn't any place, any room where we didn't belong. And that message of fairness and dignity, of justice and hope, that's what the Rainbow Coalition was all about. In 1984, and then again in 1988, Jesse didn't just speak to black folks, he spoke to white folks and Latinos and Asian Americans and the first Americans. He spoke to family farmers and environmentalists. He spoke to gay rights activists when nobody was talking to gay rights activists, and blue-collar workers. And he gave them the same message, that they mattered, that their voices and their votes counted. He invited them to believe. He invited us to believe in our own power to change America for the better. By the delegate count, Jesse's two candidacies ultimately came up short. But he paved the road for so many others to follow. Doug Wilder became the first elected black governor. Carol Moseley Braun went to the U.S. Senate. Because of Jesse, the Democratic Party changed its rules, ending the winner-take-all distribution of delegates during presidential primaries, which meant underdogs and outsiders like Bill Clinton or Bernie Sanders could stay competitive and build momentum instead of getting knocked out early. And it was because of that path that he had laid, because of his courage, his audacity, that 2 decades later, a young black senator from Chicago's South Side would even be taken seriously as a candidate for the presidential nomination. I still credit that first run of Jesse's and Harold Washington's campaign for drawing me to Chicago. And I didn't know anybody when I first arrived. And I was working as a community organizer, as it so happens, in neighborhoods right around here. Roseland, Woodlawn, Alt Gill, West Pullman. And I'm meeting these young preachers like Meeks and some crazy priest named Flager. And I guess Jenkins was running around, but he's kind of young. He came a little bit later, so I'm going to churches and I'm listening to all these amazing preachers, and it was hard work, and half the time I didn't know what I was doing, and progress was slow, and I definitely didn't know how I was going to survive these Chicago winters, because I grew up in Hawaii. But I do remember heading to the Push headquarters some Saturday mornings to listen and learn from Reverend Jackson. And y'all remember how on some mornings, if there was a major issue going on, the room would be packed to the rafters. And sometimes some celebrity just wanders in. And then some mornings it was kind of low-key. Either way, though, the announcements would be made, and Reverend Barrow would say a prayer, and just he'd sit there, and then finally he'd gather himself up and stand, and he'd start kind of slow, you know, and sometimes he'd talk kind of low, so you couldn't quite catch what he was saying, so everybody lean in. And over time, it was that same boundless energy that would emerge, and that same passion and that same insight. And he'd offer you a master class in economics on a Saturday morning. And he'd give you a seminar in American history and American politics. And he'd make complicated things plain. And he'd tell stories that would make you laugh 1 minute and cry the next. And whether you were a bus driver or a teacher or a business leader or a young organizer, you came away from those meetings with a better understanding of how the world worked, how power worked. And more importantly, he made you believe that if we came together, we could make the world work better. Now, we've been talking about Jesse telling us we are somebody. I am somebody. And he wasn't just talking to young black boys like Isaiah, though he loved them fiercely. He wasn't just talking to young black girls to help them believe, though he believed in them. He was talking about everyone who was left out, everyone who was forgotten, everyone who was unseen, everyone who was unheard. And in that sense, he was expressing the very essence of what our democracy should be. The ideals at the very heart of the American experiment. The belief that regardless of what we look like or how we worship, regardless of where our ancestors come from or how much money we got, we're all part of the American family. We're all endowed with the same inalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. We're all obligated to answer the call and step forward and take responsibility for making wrongs right and for caring for our neighbors and bringing the reality of America a step closer to its glorious ideals. And answering that call isn't always easy. And Reverend Jackson and his family knew that better than most. To do what he did, he would endure all kinds of hatred and setbacks and betrayals and doubters and death threats. He would sacrifice, as Jim Reynolds pointed out, the leisure and comfort of what was available to him as a far more financially secure life. And those sacrifices were not his alone. They were shared by his wife and his children. And they bore that burden with grace and strength. I got to know the Reverend and his family over the years, and as I watched his children follow his example of service, I came to appreciate the conviction that drove him and that he had passed on, the faith that guided him and that he had passed on. And it was a faith that didn't waver, a flame that burned bright, even as his body began to fail. The last time he and I had a chance to visit in person, he was already ailing. It was getting difficult for him to stand, difficult for him to speak. We were in Hyde Park, in a hotel room. I embraced him and figured we'd just have a low-key visit. Maybe he'd need some rest. And he starts coming up with this project and this initiative and issues I needed to look into. And here's some commentary that he would suggest, and some phrasing that he thought might work, and maybe we might co-write an article. And listening to him, I couldn't help smiling. Because it took me back. And I started reminiscing with him about those Saturday mornings at Push and the breakfast that he'd host, you know, away from the full meeting. And I didn't get a chance to go to that until I was a state senator, and probably Meeks invited me. So I was like, you know, I was tagging along with Meeks. And he'd pull out a piece of paper. You know, he'd scribbled some stuff, and he'd start passing out assignments and pulling together working groups and asking for updates on the latest campaign. And I'll admit, let's face it, those sessions could run a little long and did not always follow Robert's Rules of Order. But when Jesse called your name and acknowledged you in that room, especially if you were young, especially if you were just coming up, especially if you weren't sure you could pull off what you thought you might be able to do, especially when you needed help. When he did that, you stood up a little straighter. You knew you'd been seen by this giant. He'd laid hands on you and let you know you had a contribution to make. And so that day, I told him how much that meant to me and how much it meant to so many lives that he impacted. And I told him thank you, because I'd always be grateful for that legacy of hope. I know I've gone long. It was going to be much shorter until Isaiah spoke. I figure if a Detroit Piston can take up this much time, it was beautiful, and I mean that. Love me some Isaiah. We are living in a time when it can be hard to hope. Each day we wake up to some new assault on our democratic institutions. Another setback to the idea of the rule of law. An offense to common decency. Every day you wake up to things you just didn't think were possible. Each day we're told by those in high office to fear each other and to turn on each other, and that some Americans count more than others, and that some don't even count at all. Everywhere we see greed and bigotry being celebrated, and bullying and mockery masquerading as strength. We see science and expertise denigrated, while ignorance and dishonesty and cruelty and corruption are reaping untold rewards. Every single day we see that. And it's hard to hope in those moments. So it may be tempting to get discouraged, to give in to cynicism. It may be tempting for some to compromise with power and grab what you can, or even for good people to maybe just put your head down and wait for the storm to pass. But this man, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, inspires us to take a harder path. His voice calls on each of us to be heralds of change, to be messengers of hope, to step forward and say, send me. Wherever we have a chance to make an impact, whether it's in our school our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our cities. Not for fame, not for glory, or because success is guaranteed, but because it gives our life purpose. Because it aligns with what our faith tells us God demands. And because if we don't step up, no one else will. How fortunate we were that Jesse Jackson answered that call. What a great debt we owe to him. May God bless Reverend Jackson. May he rest in eternal peace. God bless you.
President Barack Obama. Well, we might as well stay in Chicago. We're in Chicago, and we had the president from Chicago. We might as well move to the songbird from Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, Jennifer Hudson.
It begin this way. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long, 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 a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Listen. Well, I go to my brother, and I say, brother, brother, help me please. But when I go to my dear brother, he winds up knocking me back down, holding my knees. Big times when I thought I wouldn't last for long.
for the EGOT, Jennifer Hudson. Ladies and gentlemen, the 46th President of the United States, please welcome President Joseph Biden.
Thank you. I think that clock is broken. I'll try to keep this under 2 minutes. The Jackson family, I know we're celebrating a life. What's the life lost? Having lost a wife and a daughter and a son. It's called out of the blue. It's not easy. No matter how much you loved them, no matter how close you were. So I just like to express my deep sense of, how can I say it, sympathy and understanding. But the big thing is he left you something that no one else could. He left you character, judgment, honesty. You can't kid yourselves about what's right and wrong. President Obama, President Mrs. Clinton, Vice President Harris. Jesse believed, the Bible tells us, that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. I hope the hell you all got that, because you're going to need help getting out of here. You know, I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania initially, where the fact that I was an Irish Catholic wasn't a very positive thing to be. And then moved down to Wilmington, Delaware, which was segregated by law, and remained that way for much of my life. And you know, it's interesting that Jesse Jackson, before we knew Jesse Jackson, I was raised with the notion that that hope was all you really have. You can't give up hope. My dad used to say, when you get knocked down, Joey, just get up. Just get up. Well, I was a kid. I was a relatively good athlete, a pretty good student, but I stuttered to talk like that. Now, if I told you all earlier, when I was a kid, I had a cleft palate or a club foot, none of you would have laughed. But it's okay to laugh at stuttering. I'm not being critical of you, but think about it. It's the one place where people think you're stupid. Oh, really? I'm a hell of a lot smarter than most of you. But all kidding aside, it makes you feel really small. Makes you feel really small. And you know, when I moved from Wilmington to Claymont, Delaware, a working-class town, I was surprised. I remember being dropped off at the little Catholic school I went to, 3rd grade. And I watched this bus go by every day. And it passed, I was on the call of Philadelphia Pike connecting Wilmington and Philadelphia. And it passed the turn to the big high school, Claymont High School. And the little Catholic school I went to, Holy Rosie, was right on the corner. I remember saying to my mom, "Mom, why does that happen?" She said, "Well, black kids aren't allowed to go to school with white kids in Delaware." And, you know, the more I thought about that, I thought to myself, how can that be, how can that work? How can that be right? And so, as strange as it sounds, I got involved in being concerned about it. I didn't know a damn thing about the civil rights movement. I was going into 4th grade. But you know what's right and you know what's wrong and you feel it. You know, the fact of the matter is, the man of God and the people throughout the decade of friendship and partnership, I knew Jesse. We were both young. I'm only 83. Here's 80. I'll tell you laughing at. That's 40 times 2 plus. But all kidding aside, we came up through the same time. I knew Jesse, and history remembers him. I knew him was determined and tenacious. I knew him was underrated, undeterred, and unafraid. Not a joke. And more than most, Jesse was dedicated with every fiber in his being to redeeming the soul of America. The soul of America. You know, Jesse and I came up together as leaders in the Democratic Party. We had very different backgrounds, in some cases even different views, but never on race. Sometimes we went at it toe-to-toe. We disagreed on some issues. But that's what I actually admired most about Jesse, his passion. He was passionate. His passion, the courage of his convictions. And you know, his courage inspired a hell of a lot of us, even though we were the same age. You know, with his captivating presence, his stirring words, he would be easy for history to mistake Jesse for a firebrand. I think they'd get it wrong. Jesse certainly created his fair share of good trouble. But through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message was one of unity. That's what he talked about. Through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message of unity moved people in the right direction. Above all, he always sought common ground. I remember telling Jesse that I knew a guy in South Africa that I was going to go see. His name is Nelson Mandela. And Jesse saying, how are you going to guys actually see him? By the way, you know, the continent of Africa is going to be the largest continent in the world in terms of population by the year 2050. The largest in the entire world. Watch, man. Watch. And the fact of the matter was that I remember there were a group of senators going down to, I got elected when I was 29. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in. For real. Some people I wasn't bright enough to be sworn in. But the point was, I had to wait 17 days before I could be eligible to be sworn in as the United States Senator. One of the benefits that had was I wasn't going to leave the Senate. I wasn't going to be sworn in because I got a phone call on December 18th before we would get sworn in January that my wife and daughter had just been killed and my 2 boys were going to die. So I decided what I was going to do. There was an accident. There was Christmas shopping. A tractor trailer hit them. So I decided I wasn't going to go to the Senate. And often pointed out to me, I said, you know, my kids can, the state of Delaware can always get another senator. We had a Democratic governor. And, but they can't, my kids can't get another father. But because of a couple of people, starting with Teddy Kennedy and a guy named Fritz Hollins from South Carolina, where Jesse was from, and a few others after Hubert Humphrey and others, they put their arm around me and they said, look, just stay for 10 months, and then go. Because they knew I was going to be leaving, as Hillary can tell you, and all 3 of them can tell you, is that when you're a freshman, you don't get on the good committees. Committees everybody wants to get on are Appropriations, Finance, Judiciary, and Foreign Relations. So to keep me down there, they put me on 2 really important committees. The Judiciary Committee, which allowed me to appoint the first black justice to the Supreme Court. And the Foreign Relations Committee. The real benefit of that was, I've been around so damn long, I literally, and I'm not being critical of my colleagues, I know more heads of state personally than any other president in the history of the United States of America. Which means I know a lot about other countries. I spend a lot of time. But here's the point. You know, the fact is that as I learned, and by the way, I've forgotten more about what Putin does and these guys and Xi than most people know. I've met with Putin anyway. And remember, Barack was a great, great man to be vice president for. I really mean it, Barack. Thank you. Barack and I had a deal where we'd talk with each other every morning we'd be the first two people we talked to. And every night we'd be the last two people we talked to. And Barack would be asking me a question or something. I'd say, well, you know, it's all personal relations. You go, I know, Joe. Enough about all personal relations. But the fact of the matter is, that's why he was such a damn good president. And the whole point of what I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, Jesse did it really well. You got to know people. You got to understand what's on their mind. You got to kind of speak to them. You got to be able to talk to them. And above all, Jesse always saw common ground. Of course, he preached hope because, folks, despite all he endured growing up, despite the pain and disappointment he experienced, Jesse was an optimist at his core. No matter what you say, at his core, he was an optimist. I don't know if it was born out of religious beliefs, I don't know if it was born out of how it arrived, but it arrived in people in different ways. But it mattered a lot. It mattered a lot. He kept the faith with the American people. Every time I moved after I moved from Scranton, we'd go up there and spend the summers up there. Every time I leave my grandpa Ambrose Finnegan's home, he was an All-American football player at Santa Clara when Irish Catholics weren't very much in vogue, and kept in the mines up there, as Hillary knows that state well. And every time I leave the house, he yelled, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandmother will no, Joey, spread it. Well, folks, I had the opportunity to come up in politics at a time with people like Jesse around, and Jesse in particular, where he talked about hope. He talked about hope. He believed in his bones in the promise of America. We're all created equal in the image of God. And we hear this all the time, but I wonder how many people really believe it. He believed everybody deserved to be treated with equally and throughout their lives. And while we've never fully lived up to the promise, I don't think things would have been the same had Jesse not been around, because Jesse decided that his life was ensuring that we never fully walk away from it either. Because there's bad times like now. We're in a tough spot, folks. We got an administration that doesn't share any of the values that we have. And I don't think I'm exaggerating a little bit. So, he knew who we were at our best, and he simply refused to let us off the hook as a party, as a nation, or as individuals. And time and again, through triumph and turmoil, with relentless insistence on what is right and just, he helped lead us closer to fulfilling our nation's promise of restoring the nation's soul. He used his gifts to influence generations of Americans, and countless elected officials, including presidents, as you see here today. And though through his impassioned words on the campaign trail and through moments of quiet courage, Jesse changed history in ways numerous and profound. In fact, I want to thank the Jackson family again, because you don't do it without family. My dad used to have an expression, Miss Jackson. Say, family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's all family. And Rainbow Push Coalition, you know, the family, you're just incredible. But I promise you, as much as we're celebrating here, when you leave here, you're still going to go home and you're going to feel a little hole in your heart. He's gone. He's gone. But only I can tell you from experience of losing so many people in my family, the day will come when his memory brings a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. It will come. It will come. And my prayer for you is it'll be sooner than later. Look, you know, at the Legion of Americans, I know there are many who counted Jesse as a mentor, a friend, a hero. Let us be what Jesse called us to be. A margin of hope. Sometimes just a margin. You change people's lives, you change community lives. Lift up this country and light the path to be a nation Jesse always believed we could be. You know, 3 years ago this week, Jesse and I came together once again on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Walk across that bridge. When you stand there, you come from a state like Delaware, you understand what's on the other side when they're waiting there. Thugs on horses waiting to beat the living hell out of you. Well, let me tell you something. We reenacted that a number of times. But this time, Jesse's in a wheelchair. But he's not deterred. His faith renewed his strength. And with faith, he didn't grow weary and didn't let us grow weary. No, he really didn't. I know it sounds strange, but he didn't. I reflected on Jesse's strength and his spirit. Let me close with sharing a hymn that means a lot to the Biden family. Particularly meant a lot to my son, Bo. Bo is a wonderful guy. He should be standing here, not me. Bo was the Attorney General.